And good morning, afternoon, or evening to everybody who's watching. This is the Little You Guest Speaker Series, and the dream is really to bring top industry practitioners and their stories to the youths in Singapore and beyond, asking them what do they do, why do they do what they do, and what should you do if you want to get to that place. All right. And with our guest speaker series, of course, those who've signed up for our guest speaker series pass will get to ask the guest speaker questions in real time. And I think the questions are always very delightful to have. All right. I want to introduce you to our guest speaker today. His name is Mike Flanagan. He's from the USA. He's a senior executive with 20 years of experience in educational technology, management consulting, and technology consulting, and he uses it to support corporate and K-12 sector. And he is the CEO of the Mastery MTC, Mastery Transcript Consortium, which is a very exciting software that really helps to blend very progressive transcripts with partner schools. And I just wanted to tell you that Little You is now officially a member of Mike Flanagan's MTC. Other things that Mike does, you can read on his LinkedIn, too many things. He's recognized as an industry thought leader, frequent keynote speaker at major industry conferences, and leader of workshops, panels, and breakout sessions. And of course, if you want to know more about Mike, the best thing is to listen to him. And here's Mike.
Thank you so much, Dawn, and thank you for that nice introduction. And thank you to everyone from the Little U community who made time to join us today. So as Dawn said, my name is Mike. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, and which is a town on the east coast of city on the east coast of the United States. Everything Dawn said about the work that I do is very nice and very true. But one of the most important things you could all know about me is that I'm a parent. I have two sons. Many years ago, they were little kids, and now they're all grown up and they're in college and they're studying mechanical engineering. And the reason I mentioned my two sons is that even though they both have very similar interests, they both love robots and drones and building cars and understanding engines and rockets. They had very different approaches to school. One of them loved school and was very happy and was happy with teachers giving him homework and doing the homework. And my older son wasn't happy in school. He didn't love the way that teachers asked him to do assignments. He got bored with certain kinds of doing worksheets. And what we realized is that if he was going to be successful, we needed to find a school for him that was a good match for the way that he liked best to learn. And if any of you like Legos, you'll know that you'll appreciate that my son loved Legos when he was little. And what we realized is that he was happiest when he was building. He is happiest when he was using his hands and making things and trying out things and testing. So for him, we tried to find a school for him that felt most like a place where he could go and build things. And we were very lucky because there was a school like that near us in Boston. We sent him to it. It was called CSW, the Cambridge School of Weston. And I share that story because, as Dawn pointed out, I now work in technology. And if any of you have a smartphone or a laptop or an iPad and you like to play games on it or you like to learn on it, that's the kind of work that I've been doing now for about 20 years. I've been helping companies mostly use technology to teach people how to learn things that they need to know for their jobs. But many years ago, I was a high school teacher. I taught English to high schoolers, and I lived in the island of Hawaii and actually the island of Oahu in the state of Hawaii, which is a beautiful place. And I was very lucky to live there and teach English at a private school. And so I've done both jobs. I've helped kids learn and taught writing and English, which I loved. And then I've also helped big companies build technology products. And so the lesson that I took away from watching how my sons learned and how they learned differently, I started to ask questions about why aren't all schools, able to meet kids who learn in different ways? What would it look like? What would need to be true for every school to offer a track or a path for young people who love to build, who love to create, who love to solve problems? I was the kind of student who was very happy in regular school. I did well there. My youngest son did well that way too. But not everybody works that way. I often, because my kids love robots, I talk about how people are wired, and people are wired in different ways. People have different programming, and they like to learn in different styles. And so for me, that was a problem that I found really interesting. So the organization that I work with now, and Dawn said it, is called the Mastery Transcript Consortium. And I'm going to show you a little bit of the work that we do, and hopefully you'll see pretty clearly why it's an interesting fit and why it's helps. We think it's a good fit for learners in Little U, and why we think we're so happy to have Little U as part of the community. But Mastery Transcript was really an answer to a question. If this kind of schooling, where kids are doing projects and they're working with their hands and they're solving real problems, if we create schools where young people are allowed to make choices and choose what they learn and where and how do we help the rest of the world understand what they're doing? Because it doesn't look like regular school. The report cards and transcripts and diplomas that we make for regular school have been developed for years, tens of years, decades, to match things like grades and courses and numbers. But the schools that we work with don't work that way anymore. So we were really interested in what would a different kind of report card need to look like? What would a different kind of transcript need to look like to match the learning models that we were most excited about? And the answer is that I can actually show you what it looks like, and I'm going to do that right now, if that's okay. So what you are seeing now is an example of a learning record, a mastery. Basically, it's a version of what we call the mastery transcript. If in a regular transcript, you have lists of all the courses that you've taken and how much time you spent studying math or English or foreign language or history, the mastery transcript is different. It's interactive, and it focuses on what teachers and school leaders might call competencies, but what the rest of us would call skills, things that you need and want to be good at. And you can think of skills as sort of a toolbox. When you're just starting out and you're learning how to use tools, you might have only one or two. You might have a hammer and a screwdriver. But as you get better and you get better with different skills, you'll add different tools to that toolbox. And that's how we think about skill building. We want young people everywhere to have the best and most appropriate toolbox for the way they like to learn and what they want to do after school. And then what we need to do is show the rest of the world what they have in that toolbox. And so each of these lines here in our transcript represents one of those skills, one of those different tools. This particular school that we work with has categories. We call them domains. And they talk about things like being a responsible citizen, or communicating clear and effectively, or being a creative and practical problem solver. So those are the kinds of things that the schools and programs we work with care about the most, building those different, we call them interdisciplinary, but that's a fancy way of saying skills that you can use in a lot of different places. What we also try and do too is embrace the technology. Regular report cards and transcripts are just flat pieces of paper. Honestly, they're a little bit boring. But our transcript works really well on things like iPads and phones and computers. You can click on it and we'll tell you what you're looking at. And we encourage people to explore and to browse and to see examples of what learners are working on. We, in addition to sharing information, what the school tells us learners are good at, we also let learners share evidence of their work. So every mastery transcript, every MTC learning record contains examples of work that's been provided by young people. So it's a place not just to record what schools are saying about what you like to learn, it's also a place where you can share the learning that you're doing and that you're most proud of. And we think that's a really, that's a feature that a lot of our schools have in common. The schools that we work with are encouraging young people to take on projects, to build things, to create things. And we think it's sort of a shame that in normal report cards and transcripts, you can't share any of that work. All you can do is share sort of the numbers and the grades that you got for the work. We think that learners should be empowered to share the actual work with the rest of the world. So that's kind of what we've done. We share a picture of the skills that young people are building, and we give them a place to share evidence, examples of their work with the rest of the world. And the nice thing about this approach is that when we started, it actually seemed a little bit out there. A lot of people said, this seems kind of strange. Like, why, why would you do this transcript? Who's going to use it? But what we've been really pleased by is that there's actually a lot of people out there who have been looking for something like this. We now work with a network of schools and learning organizations, and it really is a network around the world. We have schools in 30 different countries. We do have a lot of schools here in America because that's where we got started, but we have 400 schools and districts now. We serve like a population, you could say, of over 150,000 learners. And our learners now are using our learning records and transcripts to do all kinds of things, some of the things we never even expected. We knew when we started, we wanted to create a full transcript that would allow high school graduates to apply to college. And that's going great. There have been over 300 colleges and universities who have accepted learners using this kind of different learning record. And in addition to that, we have young people who are using it to apply for jobs, to apply for internships, part-time programs. They're using it to apply for scholarships. And all of those things we think are great. We've also gotten requests from schools to use it to document work that's being done by adults. So we now have schools that are using Mastery transcripts in colleges of medicine and pharmacology. And we have there's a program now at a place called the University of Michigan here in the United States that wants to do a whole college curriculum that we would call mastery based, and they're going to use our curriculum, or excuse me, our transcripts to capture that curriculum as well. So that's sort of what we do. We are an organization that works with learners, that works with families, and that works with educators. And what we all have in common is a belief that school can be different and can help young people be prepared for everything that they want to do in college and in life by focusing on skills and by giving them space to build and create and do things that are really interesting for them. So that's what MTC is, and that's how I got started. So again, told you a little bit about my experience as a parent and as a teacher and as someone now who works in technology. And we're really excited to be working with Dawn and with the Little U community.
Mike, to get to what you're doing, how would you advise a young person on the career progression path? I mean, your work is really in supporting schools and through technology. So what does it mean for a young person to get a job like that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have now spent a long time working in technology, but I'm not a programmer. I don't build software. I think if young people who want to build software and learn how to code and becoming an engineer, it's a wonderful path and it's a great skill set. One of the things that I have sort of surprised both myself and my parents is that when I was in college, I actually majored in English. I spent a lot of time reading books and learning how to write and talking about books and writing with other people. But what I realized, and this is maybe one of the reasons why I think skills and skill building is so important, is that a lot of the things that I learned how to do well when I was teaching English and when I was studying English, things like active listening, things like facilitating conversations, things like reading complicated texts and trying to figure out what they were really saying and what they meant, and trying to communicate really clearly and take complicated topics and try and explain them in simple ways. All of those things are actually really, really helpful in technology. There are many, many engineers, programmers who make beautiful software code. But sometimes the same skills that make them really, really good at building beautiful code means that sometimes they don't spend as much time learning how to explain what they're doing to the people that are actually going to use their systems. Or more importantly, spend a lot of time listening to the people that are and talking to them about what they're trying to do and the problems they're trying to solve. And it turns out that there's a whole set of jobs in technology that require people and that are really helpful if you have good listening skills and good writing and speaking skills. And it's called product management. It's the basic idea of translating between people who love talking to computers and people who love talking to the people who love using computers. And so I got my start in product management. And then that's really what I've been doing ever since. And so, yeah, I think if, the organization I lead, it's interesting, but I think if you had to sort of say, what's the job I have, it is product management, and it's to say, there's roles in the tech world, even for people that don't speak tech as a first language.
So they don't think you're funny, like they don't think you're weird, you don't know how to code, but they're happy to work with you?
I think there's so many different things that you need to be able to do to bring a product to market, right? So you have to understand, you have to know enough about their jobs where you can't ask them to do things that aren't possible, or ask them to do things that would take more time than is reasonable. But there's also a lot of things that you need to do, and certainly in the for-profit world, where it's not enough just to make a good piece of technology. You also need to sell it to people. You also need to convince people to give you money to make it. And so a lot of those additional skills are actually, you need a team with people with different skill sets to do it. So I think everyone in a good team appreciates people who have different skills, even if they don't all have the same ones.
And what could go very wrong in your line of work? Let's talk about some of those bad stories.
I love that. That's a great question. I think so. When I got started, when I moved from teaching into the startup world, there were two things I realized very quickly. I was a good student. And in the schools I went to, being a good student meant doing exactly what you were told and listening and following instructions. And I think that was very good. I think it's good to be able to follow instructions. But when you are starting a company, there are no instructions. No one tells you what to do anymore. You can't start the day by going into the classroom and looking up at the chalkboard and just doing what's written on it. And so really working in the startup world means that a lot of times you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail. In traditional schools, making mistakes is a bad thing. Failing is a bad thing. In the world of startups, failing is necessary. And so I had to learn a whole new set of skills when I moved from the traditional world and the academic world into the world of startups. I had to learn how to fail safely, how to feel comfortable. And that was really important for me. All of my best learnings, all of the best stories where I learned the most when I was getting started in business and starting startups are things where we made big mistakes, where we learned the hard way and not to do things a certain way. And so I guess my question to you is, and I'm probably flipping it around, is what can go wrong, when you're in your line of work? Hopefully a lot. Hopefully, if things don't go wrong, it means maybe you're not trying hard enough. You're not taking enough risks. So I've actually learned to embrace actually taking risks. That said, there are things that could go wrong, like with our project, and we pay a lot of attention to them. So we're making a new kind of report card for use by innovative schools. It's really important that the people who work in colleges and universities understand it. None of them were asking for a new report card. We felt it was necessary. So we try very hard to get in front of our transcript before it gets sent to a college or university. So, and we don't get to decide where it goes. I know that some of the learners you have on the call today are a little bit younger, but when it's time for them to apply to university, they and their families are going to decide where they apply. They're going to decide where the transcripts go. We don't get to decide. And so we have to be ready as an organization to maybe very quickly talk to a bunch of colleges and universities that we've never talked to before and make sure that they're not surprised when a new and different kind of transcript shows up. That's an opportunity where a lot can go wrong, and so we work very hard to make sure that we get in front of it all the time and nobody's ever surprised. But we're human, and so sometimes people do get surprised, and that's okay too.
Okay, that's great. There are two questions in the chat room, one for Grace and one for me. Grace is, what is your advice on preparing and embracing for potential failure? And I think mine's linked to that as well. Has there been any college or universities who have rejected the MTC, and what have you done to overcome that?
So I think preparing and embracing for potential failure is, how do you find places, both in your learning and outside of school, where you can fail safely, right? So I think one of the reasons why a lot of our schools really enjoy and encourage students to participate in athletics and sports to do things like performing arts and theater and music, and to do things like competitions and robotics, is that not everybody can win all the time. There's going to be times where, you're going to lose, and you have to learn how to lose gracefully and to think about learning from how you've lost and what to do differently. I think performances and things like theater and music are really interesting because there's very high stakes, right? You're going to go and you're going to sing, or you're going to perform, or you're going to dance in front of everybody. And to do that means you're probably going to need to practice a lot. And practicing is basically about failing safely. So doing it again and again, doing it wrong lots of times until you can figure out how not to do it wrong and how to do it right and get things right. So I think all of those different environments, we try and find those characteristics in our learning environments too in our schools. We are big fans of an approach called project-based learning, because we think projects have those same characteristics. No one ever kind of gets their project right the first time. It requires you to make mistakes, look at feedback, and try again. And so all of those, I think, that's sort of how best to prepare and embrace that idea of failing safely. Just sort of, the more you get used to it, then you realize it's part of the learning process and it's okay. And you start to not feel bad about it and not feel kind of like that it's scary. To Dawn's question, have there been any colleges that have rejected the transcript completely? Not really. I think there was one like last year who really said, we really need a regular transcript, but that was like one out of like 300 plus colleges. So I feel like that's pretty good odds, like percentage wise. And I think it's interesting because every college, right? So, we're now all coming out of these really strange 2 years of a global pandemic, right? And in the first year of that, when everything suddenly had to shut down overnight because of COVID, there were many colleges who didn't have access to things like standardized tests. There were many schools in the US, high schools, that stopped issuing regular grades. And so all these colleges and universities suddenly had to think differently about how to look at students and applicants. They didn't have the things that they would have chosen. And so even though COVID was scary and not fun for anybody, it created what we would call a natural experiment. It meant that every college had an opportunity, was forced really to do things in a different way. And so many of them realized that, they didn't actually need grades. They can still look at applicants. They can look at other things. And so even though that was a really tough 2 years for us, like around the world, we're coming out of it now with a lot of people in what we would call higher education, colleges and universities, thinking very, very differently about what it means and what kinds of information is useful to them and how they can make decisions about who gets to come to their campuses. So.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mike?
Oh, that's a great question. Elisha is asking, how many years before you finally saw some success in your startup? Okay, so the true honest answer is the first startup didn't succeed at all. we had an idea and it wasn't a very good one, but we took that idea and we turned it into a different kind of business that was kind of successful. And then we took the idea from that business and we took it into a third one. Now, when you ask people to talk about their businesses, the word they would use is they would say we pivoted. We turned from one idea to another. We didn't have that word back then. People didn't talk about pivoting then. We just talked about starting over. But the third business actually worked pretty well, not like Microsoft or Apple well, but we created I don't know how to do this simply, but we created a company that helped big companies train and teach their employees using technology. And we got into a thing that, if there are any kind of adults in business in the room, we got into the business process outsourcing space. So we engaged in large-scale business process outsourcing of the HR and corporate learning function, which is a really complicated way of saying other companies hired us to teach their employees how to do things well. And when we did that, that business worked out pretty well. It wasn't a huge company. I think when at our biggest point, I think we had about 300 employees, and it was about $50 million business. And then as a big company came and wanted to buy it, and so they bought it from us. And that's when my job changed, and I started moving into a different line of work and going back into software that works with K-12 schools. Oh, good questions. How have your transcripts changed or developed over the years? Yeah, so the first 2 years we didn't even have a transcript, right? We're a nonprofit company organization, so we don't exist to make money. So we could take our time. We exist to sort of have an impact, to try and like do good things to help people and help schools and change the world. And so we were able to spend 2 years just talking to schools and talking to colleges and doing lots of design sessions where we would create sort of like, we call them prototypes, but they were like, paper, kind of mock-ups of what the transcript might look like, and putting them in front of people, asking them to tell us what they thought about them, how they would want them to be different. So we basically went through probably a dozen or more different versions of that based on that feedback. So even in those first 2 years, the transcript changed enormously. We started with guesses or ideas about what it might look like or what might need to be on it. And then we learned and adjusted really quickly based on feedback. Then we launched the actual working version of the transcript, the software version. It was just 4 high schools used it in the first year. And the version that we launched, some things look pretty similar, like that picture I showed you of the different colors, what we call the credit wheel, which is those competencies in the middle. That was still in the first version, but there were other things that people didn't like. For example, we used to count up the number of credits that a young person had earned, and we put it right in the middle. And then we realized, based on feedback from everybody, that if you're trying to get people to think about, not think about the of grading and ranking, putting a big number smack in the middle of your thing isn't a very good idea. So that's a good example of something we changed really quickly. And what we replace now is, instead of a number, it's a place where a young person can feature one piece of evidence that they're most proud of, that featured evidence. So that's a good example where we started with something that we thought was a good idea. We realized it wasn't. And then when we change it, we now have something that's much better and sort of works better for the philosophy of the schools that we work with and our teachers and our learners. Dawn's asking a good question about how have the transcripts changed the way schools look at themselves? I think, the schools that went first, that joined MTC, had a pretty good sense of themselves at schools. They really sort of knew what they wanted to do, and they were happy to use our transcript. What's really interesting is that we now have many more schools that we work with that join because they want to be like those first schools, right? So they joined because they want to learn from other educators and learn from other communities and create schools that are different and that are sort of embracing this model. I think the most powerful thing that we learned is we knew that we needed young people to tell us what should be on their transcripts, right? I talked before about that idea of evidence, of sharing work. That process of picking the work and sharing it, we knew that was necessary to build the transcript. We couldn't decide for a young person what should be on screen. They had to tell us. What we realized, though, is that that process of picking a piece of work and reflecting on it, talking about it with people in your school, making choices about sort of what it demonstrated, like what it means, like the skills that it's demonstrating, that was actually the most powerful part of the learning process. So I think that's an area where what we realized is the process of building one of our transcripts isn't something that you do on top of school. Actually, if you're doing it right, it's the process of school, doing work that you're proud of, talking about it with somebody, sharing it, and then using the feedback that you get from that sharing process to make a decision about where to go next. And if you do that again and again and again, you're going to learn so much. And in many ways, that's kind of the process I was describing with those startups and those companies that I was talking about when I was a young adult, right? We were building something that we thought was important. We were sharing it with the world. In our case, we were sharing it by trying to sell something or trying to grow a business. We got feedback, not feedback from teachers, but feedback from the market, from our customers, and from advisors and investors. And when those things didn't work, we adapted and we made changes and we did it again. So that process of, that you do again and again, we think is wonderful preparation. It's preparation for higher education. It's preparation for life. And so that really is the most powerful thing, where the way we think about building the transcript is the way we now start to think about school and preparing kids for a lot of different environments. Are there other countries? So now I'm going to go to the next question. Grace has asked, are there other countries outside the US who also use MTC? Yes, we have a big group of schools in China. We have a big group of schools in Australia. There is a whole project in the United Kingdom, in England, called Reimagining or Rethinking Assessment. And it's a bunch of schools that are asking almost identical questions to the schools of MTC. What are better ways for us to build school? How do we assess what young people are doing? Do we have to use sort of like a big state exam, like a big kind of standardized test? Can we do it a different way? So in many different countries, there are sort of initiatives, some of which are using MTC directly, and some of which are sort of in parallel with MTC. Like they're doing their own thing, but it looks a lot like what we're doing because the things that they care about, the questions that they think are important, are very similar to the questions we're asking and trying to answer every day.
Thank you. Thank you for answering all those questions. We still have some time. Anybody else wants to ask? Before I ask a very embarrassing questions that teenagers have been asking our guest speaker.
Okay.
Which is, how much can you make from your job, Mike? They keep asking money question. Oh dear.
That's a great question. That's a very the world that I work in is the nonprofit world. So I would make more money if I worked in a company where we were trying to make money as our job, as our primary thing. But there are rewards in working in nonprofits that are harder to quantify, right? So I get to do some things and go places and be invited to talk about our work, precisely because people are interested in the project, because they don't see it as a project where we're just trying to make money. But I think there's nothing wrong with making money, and I think it's great. So I would say that so a product manager who works for a big for-profit software company in the United States could make anywhere from, let's just put them in a city. Let's say they work in San Francisco, where there's a lot of technology companies. They could make anywhere from $250,000 to $450,000 a year, and they would probably get what's called stock options. They would work for they would get shares in the company that they're working for. And then really good engineers, people who can actually write the software, that work for places like Google and Facebook and Amazon, could make even much more than that. So, but I don't do that, so I don't have direct experience in how much they make, so I can't speak to that. But yeah, I think it's the entry level jobs probably pay a lot less, but it's if you stick with it. The other thing you have to decide too is, do you want to work for a smaller company where you might be able to actually own a piece of it, which is exciting when you start a company, or when you are in what's called venture capital backed companies. You usually will own a piece of the company, but you may not make as much money on your paycheck. But if something good happens, if the company gets bought or something, then you'll benefit from that. Or you could just work for a giant company that makes a lot of money and you wouldn't necessarily own much, but they'll give you more on your actual paycheck. So no, not an embarrassing question at all. I think we don't talk about money, and we try to talk to our kids about making good choices about what they study and what they do, and it's because you need to know. So what are some of the things you have heard from young people using MTC about using these transcripts? That's a great question. I think one of the things that we've heard is that Well, I'll say this, the young people who have gone first using the transcript, either for college or for applying for jobs, they're doing really, really well. It's really got nothing to do with the transcript. It's got everything to do with the kinds of schools they went to, the schools that I'm describing, right? Schools where they were given more space and time to make choices, schools where they were encouraged to solve problems and work on projects. Um, like I said before, or like I was trying to explain before, that process of school is the process we use to build our transcript. They're kind of one and the same. And so what I would say is that they find that they feel that they're very well prepared, whether it's for university or for jobs and for work. I think one of the things that we really want to avoid, and we see this a lot, especially here in the United States, is that sometimes in traditional schools, we focus so much on preparing young people to apply to university that when they actually get into university, a lot of the most important questions that they have to answer, what do I want to study? What do I want to major in? What do I care about? What motivates me? They haven't actually ever taken any time to answer those questions because they've been working so hard at school. They've been working so hard to get good grades and get good tests and to prepare. So it's prep. And then if you're lucky enough to get into college, now suddenly people say, great, what do you want to do? And they don't know what they want to do because they've never been asked that before. That's probably the single biggest difference that we're pretty happy about. The kids that have gone to schools that we work with and that have used our transcript, they're very comfortable answering that question, what they want to do, why they're in university, what they hope to study, what they hope to do after university. So we feel really good about that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Mike, I'm just wondering if you could show us any more visuals on the MTC, maybe even on the behind the scenes, some of the demos behind the scenes. Do you have anything?
Sure, I would be happy to do that. Give me 2 seconds and I will pop that up on my screen here. Should only take a second. So what I showed you before was what the world sees when one of our learners publishes their transcript or learning record. What I'm showing you now, if I did my job right, can you see what kind of looks like a little dashboard? So this is what that same learner would have seen. So I showed you this. This was the learning record for Riley. But the whole point is that Riley's building this transcript in her school or his school. And so this is what Riley sees when they log in and look at our system. And what we do is we give them places to track and see all of the different skills that they've been building as a list, see which ones that they've earned already, which ones are in progress. They can add that evidence. This is just a little demo account with only 2 pieces of work. But our vision is that if you have a young person who's working with this, say in high school or secondary school, there will be lots of pieces of evidence in here, almost one for every single skill that they've built. And what they can do is share them. And then we have features in
Hang
here.
on, Mike, just to let me
Yeah.
interrupt. Are the young people allowed to come into this page and upload evidence themselves, or do the schools have to do it?
Oh, yeah, no, they're encouraged to. They need to upload the evidence themselves. And then what happens is that adults in the school have a process to review it. And then one of 2 things can happen. So if I'm a teacher and I'm looking at a piece of evidence, let me go to the school level here and I'll show you what this looks like. So this is an example of a dashboard for school leaders. So this is, again, a little demo account. But for an individual learner, we get to track and see who's in our school and what they're doing. And then what we get is what's called a little activity feed here. So educators will see one of these. So just like if you use Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, all of the things that are new and that you need to kind of people have done kind of show up in a row. These things show up here. So I can see as an educator all the different pieces of evidence that one of my learners has submitted. And then I know what I need to do. I can look at it, I can review it, I can give feedback, and I can approve it. And once I say, yeah, so for example, if I'm at little U and I say, Dawn, I've finished a piece of work, here it is, I submit it. And then someone at Little U, an educator looks at it and says, yeah, you're right, Mike, this is good, and it should be on your transcript. Or they might say, oh, it needs more work, and you can polish it up and maybe revise it. So we give educators and learners tools that they need to build and sort of grow those transcripts over time. We also give schools a lot of tools that are useful for them as schools. So a good example of that, I talked before about competencies. That's those lists of skills that every single school has. Every school in our system has the ability to publish or share those competencies with every other school, because that's a pretty typical question we get. I'm a new school. I just joined MTC. I'm excited to build out our transcript system. I'm excited to kind of build out our skills. What are other schools doing? So what we have here is many different examples of other schools and the competency models that they've built rather. So I was talking before about kind of that School of Medicine. So here's a good example of these are the skills that they want those medical students to be developing in terms of their kind of professional kind of learning path. So that's a good example of a kind of a toolkit that we've built for school leaders. We also have built sort of a system that allows learners to tell us where they're going to school and where they want to apply rather to college, so that we can do that job of getting in front of those colleges and getting in front of those transcripts and talking to colleges about those. So I don't think Riley in this case has chosen any colleges, but she could. I could pick a college, I could add one here, and then so we could say, oh, what's a college that everybody knows about? Well, I'll just pick a big state. I live in Massachusetts. Better yet, my wife's from Texas. So I'll just I'll just type in Texas. I'll go university or University of Texas.
How about Harvard? Very Asian.
You want to go to Harvard? Everybody does Harvard, Dawn. Okay. So yes, you can pick Harvard and then you can apply it. And then you can tell us, are you applying? Are you just interested, thinking about them? Are you definitely going to, planning to apply? Have you already applied? And if at the end of it, did you get in? And then we can add that, and then we can see that. So we'll just say Riley is planning to apply, and we'll add that. And then basically that allows Riley and others to tell us where we're going. And every time a young person does that, we get a little pop-up. I have a person on my team who owns higher education outreach. And so they will know, and they'll know that, oh, Riley's applying to Harvard. And now we know Harvard, we've spoken to them, so we don't have to do anything. But if we're a school we hadn't ever spoken to, we would start the process of reaching out to them and getting to know them and making sure they knew who we are and what our transcript is.
Hang on. So what if the list of schools is not on the pop-up list? Like in Singapore, we have 6 universities. Are we able to pick that?
Yeah, we'll have to work with you to get those in there, because the first time we uploaded this, we pulled it from a national database here in the United States, but it's very easy for us to add any other college that one of our network schools thinks we should be paying attention to. Not a problem.
So if you're National University of Singapore, Nanyang Technology University, Singapore Management University, Singapore Institute of Technology, Singapore University of Social Sciences, Singapore University of Technology and Design, and the upcoming Singapore Arts University, you really do need to get in touch with Mike Flanagan and see what we can do with the MTC. And so thank you, Mike, for your time. And thank you so much for showing us the demo front and back. I'm sure a lot of people after watching this video will get in touch with you and to ask further questions. And I hope MTC gets around the world in a very significant way.